Good afternoon, everybody. Today we are again online for meeting some of the artists that were selected for the 62nd edition of the Faenza Prize. We will go internationally because we have artists coming from all over the world, and I would like to thank them for this opportunity of talking with them. I know that for some of them it is very early in the morning, so a big thank for this special occasion. So, as you know, we are recording these talks, these meetings, and they are always online on our YouTube channel. So if you miss one, you can always have a look at it on the online platform. So we will start with the only man of this selection today, Daniel Molyneux from USA. And good morning.
Good morning.
And so you will introduce us your work that was selected, Tektite. Okay. This alphabet and grammar of forms, as you briefly introduce your work. So it's the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be with you today. Thank you, Claudia, and the Faenza Museum and the jury for this opportunity to share a few images. Tektite is the piece chosen for this exhibition. My aim, obviously, was to explore very basic elements of form, almost complexity within simplicity. Process seems to be important to ceramics, so let me get that out of the way in the beginning. I start to form from wet porcelain. I let them dry. I refine and sand, fire them to 1000 Celsius, refine them again. I begin to glaze parts together. We have great glaze technology these days where a very wide firing range from almost 1000 Celsius to 1270 Celsius, so I can start connecting parts very early on in the process. And once they're fired to maturity, I continue to shape and connect pieces. Second slide, please. Tektite is part of a series of sculptures titled Chords in the Key of F Sharp. They were 9 expressions of elemental form that I felt very strongly needed to be shown together and experienced together. However, as far as a Biennale exhibition, I wasn't sure how a jury would take the presentation, or for example, if the shelf belonged in the exhibition, or if certain pieces weren't as strong as another piece. So I did not enter the entire series in the exhibition. Third slide, please. My approach to form, I believe, comes from my own early experiences reading and writing music, and later studying languages and linguistics. In those fields, as in all fields, like science and engineering, we find the typical mechanism of breaking something down to its most elemental parts in order to understand it better. Next slide, please. In the case of music and language, the elements are notes and sounds, letters, words, grammar. So I like to approach form in the same way, at least reveal some subconscious urge to express ourselves in visual language, those very basic derivations of form. Cube, the sphere, tetrahedron, etc. Fifth slide. Previous work here, I'm trying to explore wider narratives of geometrical expressionism. What makes me curious is if we innately recognize these shapes that compose, nearly everything around us on a microcosmic and macrocosmic scale in the wider universe. And sixth slide. Yeah, that's basically what I have to say about my work. Any questions?
No, thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting. I was wondering if your works were belonging from an architectural point of view, but this idea of giving materiality to sounds and music is very, very interesting, and also the putting together all the series that you presented in this context is very interesting. But what is so you started from another perspective and you arrive to this very geometrical and very precise and refined work that is very interesting. You said that it is all porcelain.
These small pieces are, yes.
Porcelain, and the color is in the firing.
Yes, that's underglaze, and where you see the white parts, that's the raw porcelain, yes.
Okay, so we are very hopefully we are willing to see the piece in presence in the exhibition in Faenza. So thank you, Daniel, for your presentation and for being with us. And we will pass to another artist who is from Swiss and Germany, Anja Seiler. She will introduce us her work, Skin Clay. Anja Seiler. She will. I think that there is a problem. No.
Everything double. Okay. I'm actually probably an artist working with clay because I'm fascinated by the earth in a very broad sense. So earth as a planet that refers to the forces of attraction and the gravitation of concentrated rotation. And
Anja, sorry, but I think that there is a problem.
Double. I hear everything double.
Yes, me too. I don't know what is happening. There is a problem. I hear everything double. Yes, me too. Sorry, but we have a technical problem. I see now Virginia. What is happening? I don't know, but yes, we will continue with Virginia. Virginia Fratello is an American artist from the States, and she is working and she is making an important research on 3D printed earthenware. And she is going to introduce us her work, Future Archaeologists, that was created in Faenza, we can say, and the floor is yours, so you can go on and introduce your work.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. Thank you for having me. Can we have the first slide, please? Actually, I think that, there we go. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So I call this project Future Archaeologies because it is a look, think both at the past and the present and the future of ceramics and architecture. And this project, as you mentioned, Claudia, takes place in Faenza. Next slide, please. I was working at the FACC last summer in Faenza as an artist in residency. And one of the things that I noticed first being in Faenza was just how beautiful the city is. It is made, the entire city is made out of the local clay from the surrounding hills, and the bricks are exposed on many of the buildings. And I think it's just so lovely, that soft, warm kind of pinkish orange color, which made me wonder what the future of masonry could be through the lens of 3D printing. So in the artist in residency, I decided to create a 3D printed brick, which you can see here. And the brick is engineered to be printed very quickly. I can, with one tube of clay, print exactly 5 bricks with no waste. And the design of the brick takes advantage of the 3D printer itself. So it's an ovoid instead of a rectangle. And it has these loops on it, which create kind of a basket-like or lace-like surface, which to me feels very feminine in some ways, contrary to a traditional brick. Next. And we didn't have all of the equipment available to do, let's say, compressive strength testing or strain testing on the brick to see how strong it would be. So we used our own bodies as a way of testing the brick, which you can see here. And this was kind of a precursor to thinking about how much weight the brick could support. So could I create larger structures out of this hollow 3D printed brick? Next slide, please. So I found a site adjacent to the studio at FACC, which is in the entrance of the ISIA Design Institute, where there is an archaeology or an archaeological exhibit that has these column fragments and stone fragments. And I was inspired by these traditional forms which come from historic buildings. And so I started to respond to those in the stacking and the placement of my 3D printed bricks. So here you can see the 3D printed bricks stacked up in the same proportions as the 2,000-year-old column fragments, the marble fragments, which exist there. So they are in dialogue with those pieces. Next slide, please. Again, a larger view that shows the overall space of the archaeological exhibit with the new 3D printed columns, which feel very much at home and natural, like they should be there. But when you look at them more closely, you realize they're quite different and quite strange, and you wonder how they ended up in this space. Next, please. So here you can also start to see them not only in dialogue with the existing column fragments, but the masonry columns, which are part of the architecture of the palazzo in which this exhibit exists. So they are also in dialogue with them. So these are probably around 700 years old. Next. So the bricks are dry stacked. There's no mortar at this point to hold them together. So I could assemble them in different ways. So here's another configuration, a kind of sinuous or curvilinear wall. Next, please. And so this wall takes advantage, I think, of the ombre or the variation in the color of the bricks. So the darker, more burnt orange earthenware bricks are at the bottom, with the lighter colors gradiating towards the top. And some of the bricks have multiple colors in them. And these are my favorite bricks, where there's a kind of tint or shade taking place. And also here I'm having to think about the ends of the wall and how they step up to create the taller surface. Next slide, please. And in this close-up view, you can see the loops or that kind of textured surface on each brick. And normally for me, I would want to be very precise and make everything very perfect. But in this case, because I was making hundreds of these, I realized that it didn't matter. They could be different. They didn't have to be perfect. There could be mistakes. And ultimately that would add, I think, to the overall texture or beauty of the wall. And in some ways it's better that they're not all perfect and all the same. So I learned something about, absolute failure and when to keep it and when to discard it. Next, please. So here again, you can see that overall gradation of the wall. And I plan to continue this project this year to print hundreds, if not thousands, of more bricks to really get this up to the scale of architecture so that you can inhabit the space. You can walk inside of the sinuous wall and feel like you are in a room and you're surrounded by the bricks. Next size, please. So parallel to the making of the bricks, I also explored 3D printing some traditional forms based on practical cookware or storage that would have been made out of ceramics in the Roman Empire. So here are some examples of 3D printed amphora. Next slide, please. And they're also situated within the archaeology exhibit at ICEA. And again, I think they blend in very well. They look like they're from the past, but they are made using a technology that is still very nascent and novel, but I think will become more ubiquitous and common. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So again, all of these objects take advantage of that kind of looping quality, which I can create with the 3D printer very quickly using the G code, which is the language that speaks to the printer. I literally take that line of clay for a walk, and these loops are a product of taking that line of clay outside of the central spiral of the body. Next slide, please. And sometimes I like to take advantage of the fact that the printer does make errors. Not every loop is perfect. Sometimes I come in by hand and work with the loops afterwards. So in this case, as the vessel is being printed, I use my fingers to twist each loop, which disguises imperfections, but it also adds, I think, a human element to it. So there is no way this particular piece could be repeated exactly. It's co-authored by the 3D printer and myself simultaneously. Next slide, please. And I also printed some functional pieces such as pitchers and cups. Next slide, please. Which you can see here, and they're situated again kind of appropriately with this marble bath, which is in the exhibit at ICEA. Next slide, please. A stufarola, which is a functional cookware. In addition to thinking about 3D printed ceramics and architecture, thinking about art, I'm also interested in kind of functional and practical vessels that can be used every day in the home. Next slide, please. And this storage vessel, which you can see here, is probably one of my favorite pieces that was created in Faenza last summer using the local clay. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia, for your introduction to your work. It's amazing, this connection between the past and the future of ceramic in this setting, very special that you found in Faenza. And one question about, you use red and white earthenware. Mm-hmm. So it's no porcelain. You are not used to use porcelain, not at all. And I saw some images of your work also settled in as architectural wall with the gardens inside the gardens. So it's also a very special connotation that you are able to install this as an architectural park, a real wall for architecture. So it's very interesting, this part of your work. So thank you very much, and we will see how will be the shape in Faenza of your bricks.
Yeah.
And so it will be a new and different work, because the museum, the exhibition room of the museum is very, very contemporary. So it's not belonging to the past, but we will see directly the future side of your work. Okay. So thank you very much, Virginia. And let's go back to Anja. If there are no problems this time with your connection. So Anja, we were saying that you will introduce us your skin clay, a poetic that goes through a traditional iconic form of the vase, and the floor is yours, and please give us your introduction.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just very quickly will introduce my work, and then I will come to the work of Faenza. So I'm probably an artist working with clay because I'm generally speaking fascinated by the earth, but in a very broad sense. So for example, the earth as a planet that refers to the forces of attraction and gravity and the rotations, or for example, the earth and its geology and the origin of material, or the earth, synonym of life, like for seeds and plants, and maybe also the earth which separates the sky from the earth's surface in underground and overground. So in my work, I use clay as a metaphor for earth to express and investigate in all these different fields. So maybe I just give you some examples here. Thank you. These are 2 granaries, and these were made actually for a competition. I had to participate in a contemporary museum here in Switzerland. It was about Robinson Crusoe. So I like the idea that Robinson Crusoe was actually this man coming all naked almost on this very small little island, and he had to like reinvent. He went to the human history, or the history of human mankind, and so before he started to take animal clothes, then he started to make how you say, gardening and agriculture. So I invented for him these granaries, who actually are open in on the top, and where he puts the seeds in, and when you can turn them around, and so the seeds would be protected in the double wall of these pieces. So of course it was also more a very symbolic way to say that how we enter and how we protect the seeds, and so next piece. And then this is a series of pieces who I actually started to like the idea that you can go into something, and that you are a sort of aspired, aspiré in French, you would say, like you would be, you would have to like to go into the piece and go into down into really into earth. So these pieces are all very rooty. I always only work with natural ashes. I go to fetch myself in the woods, and so these pieces are very raw clay, and they always have an opening where you feel like the water sort of can flow inside and go into the underground. Next, please. So for the Faenza competition, I presented these pieces already. It was the idea to talk about skin clay, and so for me, clay is in many ways the most human material, and I had the idea that actually clay is the result of the decomposition of the mother granite, you say in French la roche mère, le granite, and which when it gets to decomposition, it brings mica, quartz, and feldspar, and the feldspar is then going to become the white clay sort of kaolin, and through the migration, the geological migration, it will inherit all different colors, like from white to black, over all the ochres, terracotta, yellow, orange, red, but never really blue and green. So for me, it was beautiful to see all these human skin colors and to work with them. So this was one thing about the texture, but then also I like very much the idea that clay is this human material, very lively and so comparable to human nature. As we, as a human being, we are like maybe 70% composition of water, and clay is 70% water, so it has to dry, and in this drying process, it goes to a situation where it's called leather hard. And so this leather, this is the moment which I'm always very nostalgic about, and I always would like to keep it that way. And so I tried in my work to give the impression that there is still this leather hard skin, which you can feel and touch when you go to the pieces. And maybe to talk, you can still, maybe you can go one picture more, please. Yes, here you can see actually. So these amphoras for me was very intuitively. I was attracted to the amphoras, to this archetype, archaic archetype, which illustrates both naturally the metaphor of a human container and the vital force it can contain. I first wanted to make them in Portugal, where there's a region where they still make wine in a very Roman sort of way, where there's a natural fermentation takes place in these big amphoras. But then actually it sorted out that I did them in Geneva, where I live, and the kiln where I was working was quite far away. So I had to construct them and transport them still when they were not fired to the kiln. So there was a huge challenge, of course. And in the end, I had the feeling that this moment was like a performance, which was totally natural and had some sort of very logic context with my piece, because it had this connotation of this fragility, not only fragility of the piece, but fragility of the craftsmanship and of the artisans. But also, I liked very much the idea that this suspension, it was like a suspension of a moment in space. I like to stop time and history, maybe. Yes, so the picture before, you can just see the piece. If you go just one picture forward, yeah, here you see the way I had to wrap them really and suspend them in order to put them into my lorry, like I put them in the lorry before bringing them to the kiln. And next. Yes, and here you can see the surface. So the way I was working, I was always trying to mix clay and then never take the clay out of the way I find it, the way I buy it, or sometimes people bring me clay. So I always wanted to mix all the time the clay and see what is happening. So yeah, this is almost what I can say about installation of course. Yeah, here is some piece that was during the Congress. The IAC International Academy had its Congress last year in Geneva, and we had a big exhibition. It's called Migration, and for this migration exhibition, I did pieces where I really mixed clay in order to show that the passage from one color to the other. Yeah, this was the piece in the exhibition for this moment. And yes, for me, clay is, of course, there's another way the way I use clay is always, I like the idea that normally there's an idea which leads to a practice, but for me, the dialogue I always have with clay is more or less always the other way around. Is I have an idea, but then in the end, clay always brings me, this dialogue always brings me somewhere else, and I'm always happy to see how the dialogue takes place.
So thank you, Anja, for this introduction. It is very interesting the way that many artists in this edition has the same approach to Mother Earth, that it is giving us a great potentiality, and we have to support it, not to destroy it. And this is your respect for the clay and for this transformation of the material, the surface, which is not perfect, but it is the expression of the variety of the clay is really amazing. So compliments for this work, your work. And what about the size? I didn't see the size, just to tell our audience, what is the size of this big vase that you are presenting?
the amphora was the size of the kiln I had, so it's maximum. It was 120 high and like 95 the diameter in the biggest diameter.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a technical question for our audience, just to we will see in presence in Faenza, and we go for it. So thank you, Anja. And the next one introducing her work will be Brook Sigal from France. Hi, Brook. And she will introduce us the work If Only for One More Day, a deep reflection on actuality and metaphor of recent times, war and conflict. So the microphone is yours. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. I started, it's a bit complicated because everybody's gone directly into ceramics. I thought that I would start a little bit about myself because I am a superposition of many lives. It's lives of where I come from, you know, gun-bearing cowboy origins in the States. Then I was born in the Caribbean, lived there for 10 years. And then I thank my parents for having exported us all, the entire family. They were architects there developing, and they exported us to Europe, and I will thank them every day because it allowed me a very rich life that I don't think exists anywhere on this earth. Not that people are not rich anywhere else. I just find that the cultural mixtures in Europe. So I chose this first introduction page, not because it's about ceramics, but it's about me. Working in a manufacturer, you can see below, there's a face. I worked in tiles, lived in England, in France when I lived in France before moving around. I was around many, many artists from around the world. Next slide. So basically, I would say one of the tasks that I've done since a very young age was to always draw. It was an obligation in our house, and I would go to museums and churches and everything. And over time, I realized that I was never really drawing the topic. I was always attracted to the material. In fact, lately, I just went to Venice, and I went to Punta della Dogana, and I saw a video by Philippe Parrenaud, and I'm not that familiar with his work, but the way he approached looking at some paintings of Goya, where he is in high definition, going so close that the painting disappears, is something that speaks to me. So I chose this sort of close-up of one of the typical surfaces that I do. I use pieces of ceramics that I made and didn't like. I include them either when the clay is soft, but I've also found that very interesting is to include them at the glazing time, because that allows me to control and not control the whole gluing process. So there's a bit of a suspension, and it's not defined immediately, and that I really like is a continual definition that I like to work with. Next slide. So If Only One More Day, and then the series that is alongside with it, is really a whole series about emotions. I did not know that I was going to do this. I think that all ceramists are constrained by form, process, the material they're using. This one is profoundly about emotions. And I used all my research on adding at different moments. The branches you see, I had worked for a long time with no success, this idea of Japanese weaving, how they, you know, the contemporary Japanese weaving, and how they can do extraordinary movement out of it. Well, with ceramics, it's a little bit more complicated to have movement. It breaks and things like that. In this, it's just a formal vase, but as you can see, the branches are falling over. The branches were added after the biscuit firing, not before, and it's the glaze that's doing this. The petals that you will see in the close-up on the following slide are added after, so I could color them, and I didn't have this homogeneity of glaze, or, you know, or this precise also, where you just put a dot here and put a dot there. That was not something that interested me. Going back to the previous slide, just to explain the object, we've all received a bouquet of flowers, and we've always watched it fade. But we keep on seeing its beauty because it represents not just the flower that we might like or not like, but also the emotion. And it's really, if only one more day is to make that emotion last. And what you're seeing here is a surround vision that I put together on those vases. On the close-ups, on the next slide, you see how I put little bits, and I will have local reductions. Basically, it's in celadons. I will be working with stonewares and porcelain, and I just love that contrast because it really is sort of like flowers. You have thick things, solid parts, soft parts, and all this I make work together, hoping that it works for the best in the fire. Next slide. So these are the two other series. You'd think there are 3 vases, but it's actually 2. The 2 that you see on the left met in the fire. It's sort of like a heated rendezvous. And all 3 of these vases have bruises. And it's really about talking about, like Anja said before, there's a certain form of skin, a different representation of skin. There's an idea of reparation. So if you go to the next slide, I think it's easier to see the close-up. So that's the encounter in the fire of the 2 vases, and they stuck together, and I really, really liked that, where the glazes are fusing. On the other side, you have these textures and colors that I did not create, that the fire created. And through silicon carbides in very small meshes, I could create local reductions. But the greens and the reds, for me, represented bruises and wounds. Next. I also like to work on flats. I find that flat are like paintings. This, called The Innocent, it was following all the innocent people being wounded. I started off looking at the saints, all these young girls, way back when, the transition between the pagans and the Catholics, and one was trying to convince the other that they were more right than the others, and all the harm that was inflicted on these young girls, and yet they resisted. So they lived through such a long story of pain, but it was faith. And I don't have faith, I can promise you. I'm not trying to sell faith. It is just the strength of these young people who did not want to give in, even under pain. And I think I conveyed that through a painting that you can surround. I like ceramic because you can go around it more than a painting, and just live it from different angles, just like a person. But I did not want to represent a person. It has this abstraction of a person. Next slide. And in this one, it's the latest work. It's very textural. I usually work very textural. I superpose many different levels. But as you can see, I still have those celadons and reductions and little flashes of colors. I have some underglaze. And I'm going to read to you something that a friend of mine, and it's not long, I can promise you, wrote when he saw it. He said, I want to see this beautiful piece as a premonitory vision, a wound in a beautiful structure that condenses your soul. The relevance is down to a passage, although a wound. The structure and space around it is large, and your incision of red color is a small mark due to be reabsorbed. You are loved, and your suffering will be reabsorbed. I like this beautiful object that you created. This was written by a friend of painter that has always inspired me. His name is Alessandro Twombly. He does beautiful sculptures, and I thank him for those words that I could never have said in the same way about my work. Next. And finally, as I said at the beginning, I've always been inspired by museums. And you know that fantastic piece of art, that's such a provocative work of The Origin of the World, where you're just looking at this person from an improbable site. And I thought I would do it with a bouquet of flowers, still with the idea of branches, and you're really looking inside the bouquet of flowers. I did it from a plant world, and it's very dark inside in the same way, just completely inspired by the painting. Next. And that is my stamp and my contact. And that's the end of it.
So thank you, Brook, for sharing your life experiences and your emotion with us. And yes, it's interesting to see how this fragility of the material it's used in a very traditional technique, because you put porcelain and celadon and all of these different layers of glazes, and it's a very particular work, and this metaphor of the flower, it's interesting because it is showing the fragility of mankind. So it's
passing time.
Yes,
with all its adversity, you know, through
yes,
beauty, through not so. And I think it's sort of, I wanted to englobe it.
All to put it together. So thank you, Brook, for your introduction. And we will go to the last artist of today, Nora Smahelova from Czech Republic. Hi, Nora. She will introduce us her work, Modern Organs Business, Creating a Life from Clay. It's a nice reflection on the time we live in, a very sad reflection. The floor is yours.
So the set for the last, no? So hi everyone. My name is Nora Smahelova. I'm originally from Czech Republic, but during the pandemic I moved to Italy, actually to Florence. So I'm very near to Faenza. And I'm working at Accademia del Caffè Espresso, which is the cultural hub of an high-end espresso machine manufacturer called La Marzocco. And here, actually, I have the possibility to combine the two worlds which I like, which is coffee and creative activities. I know it's a little bit exotic, but yeah, I will explain it a little bit later. Yes, this is a picture of the chosen work, which I have prepared for Faenza. It's called MOP, or Modern Organs Business, and it's basically a reflection of on one hand, the fast pace of our society, but also a reflection on the value of a human being. Because we live in times where we have a lot of wars and conflicts, which are actually unfortunately and actually the perfect scenario for organ dealers. There's a huge market called the red market, which is very lucrative, obviously illegal trade with extreme prices. For pieces of our vitals, the organs. Yeah, that's basically the idea for this work. And at the same time, I see it also as an innuendo for the eternal human craving for immortality and being non-vulnerable, which obviously doesn't exist yet or doesn't work. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so here we see the work in process. It consists of 5 pieces, and I have chosen to work in a clash of materials. So on one hand, I have chosen the red clay terracotta because I consider it very like simple and raw and very natural at the same time and warm. And as you have seen, I have chosen to combine it with industrial styrofoam and plastic foil. Basically the same packaging like we know from supermarkets and like the reflecting or the consumption. So it's very familiar on one hand, but it's obviously not familiar in combination with the ceramics. So it's about underlining the contrast between a very artisanal product and a very industrial disposable material. You can go to the next slide, please. I have chosen this slide. This is from the past because it was the first project I made with porcelain. And for me, it was very significant because I decided to work with porcelain and to learn about it because I was fascinated by it. But at the same time, I really started to hate it because I discovered how difficult it is to have it under control. And I was constantly confronted with my own inabilities because you see so many things after so much time, after all the firings and glazing, and then you realize, okay, it became too small or out of shape. And at the same time, this is a project which is connected with my roots, coming from Czech Republic. As you see, you have the decor, which is called the blue onion China decor, which in Czech Republic is the decor which everyone has at home. You inherited it. It's very valuable. You expose it, but no one is using it. So the idea was to make it a commodity, to put it in context with more simple forms and shapes, and to take it out of the saint wardrobe or the shelf and actually use it. And at the same time, you already see there my tendency to work in direction like I'm fascinated by consumption and the fast pace of society. So already here we have like the idea with the packaging and an industrial item, but put in a more valuable, like uplifting material like porcelain. Next slide, please. This is another work. Obviously, as you see, I'm working in very different directions because I also like I'm getting new impressions and new experiences. So I'm always trying to like digest what I see, what I do, what I experience. And then obviously it's coming out in different artworks. This one is a work which basically consists of 50 items. As you see, it's hats which are decorated in different colors or glazed in different colors, and also partially having some different items on the head. Some people also call it the creepy babies. The inspiration comes from my fascination for antique porcelain dolls and also the collector mania around it, because the antique dolls are again collected, put in a certain place at home and just exposed without having any particular value or use or usage. And at the same time, it's a parallel to underline that people have a strong tendency to accumulate useless items and sticking to memories. Next slide, please. And for the last thing, I have chosen some illustrations because it's also something which I'm doing a lot. And again, as you see, the main focus is daily things I everyone knows, which are partially so common that we don't pay attention to them. Often consumption or things which surround us at home, or as you see on the shopping bag in the train or on the road. As only to underline, as I was saying, like ceramic is one of the mediums I'm using. I don't know where my travel will go. I simply enjoy to express experiences in a creative way. basically, last year I was visiting the museum in Faenza. It was right after the pandemic. I was missing so much during the pandemic to go to museums and to see things. And one of the first museums which I wanted to visit was the museum in Faenza. And when I was there, I was thinking it would be so nice and very special for me to participate one day in an exhibition. And actually it became true. So yeah, I'm very happy to be part of this whole process of talks and of course also of the exhibition.
Thank you, Nora, for your introduction. It's interesting to see how you started from your original tradition of Czech Republic porcelain, and you work out something that it's very connected to daily life. This idea of putting and to stress the works on the consumption, exploitation, industrial production, and to point out the fact that we are consuming a lot, and sometimes we are not taking care of what is our reality and what will be our future. It is what more or less what was said by Brook and Anja in the previous talks. So it's very interesting your work, and compliments for your drawings that are amazing and your sketch. And we are happy that you decided to participate in the Faenza Prize, because your work it is very, very interesting, and we will see your installation very, very soon.
Yeah.
So we will go to the general panel with all the artists attending today in our talk. And first of all, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us. That is very, very important for preparing what is the exhibition in Faenza, and it is a tool that we are using especially for those who want to be able to attend the exhibition, and so they will have the chance to meet you and to meet your work online. So I don't see any question from the public, apart from regards and the compliments to your work. And so I will give you the invitation for next week, when we will have the panel conducted by Judith Schwartz, who is our jurors in the Faenza Prize. And we will meet another series of artists, a collective again from with Mikazo Tamago and Lyubitsa Kenevitz, Xu Yinpeng from China, Veliko Zeyak, Mareike Pauwels, and Massimo Manfredi Luccioli. So the next meeting will be the 26th of April, not Tuesday 25, because it is holiday in Italy, and so it will be Wednesday, not Tuesday. The same time, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that will be the occasion to meet and to talk with other artists. So thank you again for being with us, and stay tuned. Ciao.